fire. It's a lot of fun, and just a few weeks ago, the artist NF came out with the new album Fear, with some really fire album art. I wanted to make an animated version for fun and for some practice that matches the official effect. Doing this kind of stuff is a great way to sharpen your visual effects skills and ignite your creative process by sparking some new ideas. I'll be done now. For this video, I want to walk you through my final composition and show you everything that I did to get this final result. This way, I can show you a ton of awesome tips and tricks, even if you don't want to recreate the same thing for yourself. So at the end, comment something you learned and how you like this style of video. And check out NF's new album. It's pretty cool. Probably the most important part of this effect is the background image, and I didn't want to just directly rip off NF and use his album art, so I decided to make my own with just a mansion 3D model. I threw this in Blender, added in way too many bush instances. I think I messed up the fog volume because, that really doesn't look right. But anyways, I got good enough of a result at the end. Once I got that rendered out, I brought that into Fusion, and we have a few big problems. The first one is that this is in a linear color space, and we need to convert this to something like Rec 709 so that way we can understand what's going on. The second problem is I'm terrible at Blender, so it just doesn't quite look right. Let's start with that first one, solving the color issue. We want to keep this in the linear system when working inside of Fusion, because all of Fusion's nodes and the math behind them do math based on a linear image. So in order to get accurate results, we want to keep it in linear. But what we can do is add in a LUT to just the viewer so that way we can preview it in something that our eyes understand, while all the nodes still use linear. The way we do that is by using a view LUT. So if we come up to the top right, we're going to press this drop down menu and turn on the gamut view LUT. Now mine's going to look correct right away, but you're going to need to come up here, press the drop down menu, do edit, and then make sure that the output space is set to Rec 709 Scene. And this long name is just the official name for Rec 709. So look for something that matches this, click on that, and now we're looking at the image in Rec 709. And now we're on to the second problem, which is I'm terrible at Blender. So what I did is put this through a ton of different nodes so that way we get something that looks much closer to the final result. And this fixed image is available for you to download down below if you want to follow along and create something like this for yourself. I'm also including a depth pass, and this just contains a bunch of information about the image so that way we can place fire behind different elements without manually going through and masking it out. It's really cool, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. So we have a lot of stuff going on inside of this composition, and I want to talk about how I imported all these fire elements and got them positioned right, how I got the color looking really good, and how I'm getting real-time playback inside of Fusion with more than 20 different fire elements playing. Okay, zooming in all the way on these first fire elements, I'm just going to grab this media in and view it off to the side. So you can see this is going to be a vertical clip that just has some fire burning in the shape of a window. So all of the fire elements from today are going to be from Action Visual Effects. They aren't paying me for this video, but they did send the assets over for free. I reached out because I really like the stuff they make. These fire assets are real, and they're shot so that way they stay inside of the frame. They're also recorded in really high resolution and high frame rates, so that way we can slow them down when needed. In the case of the window fires, they're all about 20 seconds long each. This means I only need a few fire assets, and then I can just offset their timings so that way you don't notice any duplicates. Same thing with the poles and the big fires. The other thing I really like about them is stuff is yours to keep. Anything you download with your subscription or any asset that you buy is yours to own and use forever. This means you can start small with just a few assets and over time grow your library into a huge collection of visual effects tools. So if you're interested, check them out at the link below, and I have a list of all of the elements that I used in this video linked down there. But anyways, once I import this, the first thing we need to do is get this into the linear color space. So over in the inspector, I'm just using the color space controls inside of the media in, so that way I don't need a gamut node for each one of these nodes. So I'm taking the color space in sRGB as well as the gamma space in sRGB. Make sure that you check remove curve, that is off by default. Then what I'm doing is throwing this into a letterbox node, and the letterbox node is bringing this to our project aspect ratio and our project resolution. Since we're working in 1080, the nice thing about this is it's getting rid of a lot of pixels so that way we get better playback. But since I turn on auto resolution, if I need to go back and switch this to be a 4K project, we can render this entire thing out in 4K, and we're not going to be losing any quality. I also did need to change the mode to be pan and scan because otherwise it crops into the image, so we need this to be pan and scan so that way we can see the entire element. Alright, next I just used a transform node to line it up with the window, and I used the X size and the Y size to make sure that it perfectly fit. What I did then is just took all these fire elements and just kept using them over and over and over again, either offsetting the timings by using the trim tools. If I can find one right there, I trimmed 200 frames off of the beginning, and then I just used a bunch of different fire assets as well. So I think there's 17 windows and there's 5 different fire elements, and since I use those trim modes, it's basically impossible to tell which ones are duplicates. In all of these merge nodes, I made sure to set the apply mode to be screen, which screen is going to be the correct operation when compositing fire or anything bright like that. If you notice, I also set this up up, so we have a fire pass of just all the window fire, which makes it really easy for me to come down here, add in a color corrector to start adjusting some stuff, and then I can add in a bunch of glows on top of that only apply to the window fires. Once I take all this down into this merge node, I again used a screen apply mode to make sure that all of this is placed over your image correctly. So the thing that I've been using to get really good rendering playback is something called cache to disk. So if I zoom into my last merge node, you can see it has this little hard drive icon on it. And if I right click on the merge node, come to cache to disk, we have all of these settings to change what the caching is actually doing. By default, lock cache won't be turned on, and if I press pre-render, what it's going to do is render out all those frames, so that way instead of having to render all 17 of those window fires, it only renders one image coming out of the merge node. The one problem with that is if I do go back and make a change, it's instantly going to wreck all of the cache and we'll have to re-render it. So what I could do instead is lock the cache and then press the pre-render button. It's going to go through and render all those out, and if I make a change, it's not actually going to update our image and it's not going to delete the render cache. So if lock cache is turned on and you need to go back to make a change, you'll have to pre-render the whole thing so that way you can see that change in the final image. And after about a minute of it rendering, I'm now getting real-time playback on all of these fire elements, and then I can put that cached version through these color correctors and the glow, so that way I can make all of my color changes in real time. So looking at this, the color corrector, what I'm doing is just adding some saturation to the highlights as well as bringing down the gain just a little bit. And if I switch up to the master range, I'm also adding a bit more of a red tint, so that way it matches with some of the other fire elements a bit better. Now, an issue that we're running into is that this fire is coming above the building and it's coming in front of these pillars. So a few solutions is the first one that we could go through and mask out all of these pillars, so that way we can bring that back in front and have the fire elements be underneath it. But the easier solution is to use that depth pass that I talked about before. Moving back over to the background, I have this depth pass coming into a letterbox to make sure it's in the project resolution. Now normally you don't need the invert color, but if you're trying to do like a depth merge inside of the merge node and it's doing the opposite of what you'd like, that's when you'd add in the invert color, so that way it switches that around. But anyways, this is coming into a channel booleans node. So the operation is set to copy, and to read, all we have is the background channels. So basically, we're just preserving the original background image as it goes through here. Then under the auxiliary channels, we have this enabled, and to the Z buffer, we're just taking the red foreground channel. So the foreground doesn't matter, we could do red, green, or blue, it's all gonna work the same. But now when we look at this channel booleans and move our mouse around, down in the bottom left we have a Z pass, and you can see this number changes as I move my mouse around. So now that we've put a Z channel into the image, all the way over here I have this luma keyer. And I'm gonna set this up again just so you understand how it works. So add in a luma keyer. I'm gonna grab the output of this node pipe, plug it into the luma keyer, and view this off to the side. By the way, if you wanna add in these node pipes, all you have to do is hold Command or Alt and then click on the node pipe, and it's gonna add that in. And these pipe routers just do a great job of helping to organize your composition. But anyways, in the luma keyer, by default, it's gonna isolate all of the bright areas of the image. But we can change the channel to be the depth channel. And now we have these two sample buttons. If I grab the sample button and drag this around, what it's doing is sampling stuff that is close to the camera. And then if I grab the near plane and bring this over, you can see we're gonna be able to select a range and just kind of have it fall off based on how far away something is from the camera. In this case, what I like to do is bring the near plane and just set that to be negative like 100,000, and then grab the far plane and then just move this around, and we can select all of the areas that we want to be shown in front of our fire. So if we just grab one of these poles, get close with the eyedropper, and then hold down Control while moving this box, and we can just fine tune the selection to make it so it only loads in all of these pillars. But once we get that selected, I'm gonna delete this luma keyer and look at the fine layer luma keyer. You see I did basically the same thing. We can layer this on top of our image, and that way the fire looks like it's behind all of these pillars. This also sets us up really well for doing light wrap, which we're going to talk about once we get through all of these fire elements. But looking at the next one, we have the pillar fires, which look awesome and add so much to this render. I have two unique pull fire elements, and then I've just trimmed off a bunch just like I did with the window fires. These also go through the same letterbox. They have the color management set up inside of the media in nodes. And then I'm just using some transform controls to make sure that all of those line up with the pillars. And that last merge node again has that cache to disk turned on, so that way I get that real-time playback. These then go through that same color corrector and glow combo. In these glows, the first one is really intense and has like no glow size. The second one has more glow size but a lot less intensity. And the third one is a mix of both of them with a huge glow size and a bit higher of a glow intensity. And again, in all of these merge nodes, the one down here connecting it to the main graph, as well as the ones up here, we have the apply mode set to be screen, so that way they all combine properly. Then finally, the last group of fires is all of the big gas fires, again from Action Visual Effects, and when I view this, you can see those look awesome and just add so much intensity to this effect. As we come up here, one of these is unique Big Fire 3, and this is the fire that is going to be at the top of our image. And what I'm doing with this is using a grid warp, so that way I can get it so the fire fits around the shape of our mansion. I'm gonna do shift space, add in a grid warp up top, and then just grab this big fire so we can play around with it a little bit. I really don't like using the magnet select, which grabs a lot of points around it. What I like to do is use the selected option. I can add in as many grid items as I'd like, and then I can select these points to, compress them together. I can select all these bottom ones and bring it up, which is kind of what I did in the original to give it a harsh line at the bottom and to try and make it all level. If we come up here, I did add in one cache to disk after this, all of the big gas fires. And then down on the last one, I also added in a cache to disk, which I'm gonna have to re-render. But that way, since those glows and color correctors are contributing to the overall performance, I have a real-time playback version that is going into all of my final color adjustments. So you're not just limited to using one cache to disk. You can use as many as you'd like. So now that I have that real-time playback, we can move into the next section, which is going to be light wrap. And the light wrap is going to be combined with bringing in some of these bushes and placing it on top of the fire, so that way, it integrates with the scene quite a bit better. So I'm going to turn off the light wrap and look at this one step at a time. So the first thing is we're putting it into a fine layer, which is that same luma keyer that's just set with the near plane to be, a huge negative number, and then it's just isolating all of these bushes. Now, since these bushes have a really harsh pixelated edge, I added in a blur just to try and soften that and make it look a little bit better. And then up top here, we have a luma keyer that's actually using the luminance option, and it's taking that from just our main fire pass right here. So we're just isolating all the bright areas, and then we're putting the blur from the depth pass into the luma keyer as a garbage mat. So basically what it's doing is cutting out all of the fire in the area that we selected. Then we're taking a blur node, and this blur node is just blurring the image and it's blurring it into that transparent area. So when we take this merge node and have the operator set to a top, so it only shows up inside of our cutout area, what that means is it's going to add in a little bit of light wrap. And we can do that again. We have a second blur node that just adds in a lot more of a blur intensity with the blend brought down. And when we add that into the merge node with the operator set to a top, it's going to add that in and just add in some really nice light wrap. So let's look at this on the isolated level. So we bring in just the foreground pass that we want. We add in just a small amount of light wrap, and then we add in a lot more gradual of a light wrap. Then all of this is placed back on top of our image, so that way the bushes are in front of the fire and have some light wrap to help blend them together. Next up, we're going to be adding in some hotspots, or what I called isolated glow in this underlay. We're using 3 ellipse masks that just have some soft edge on them to select the bottoms of some of these fires, so that way we can add in some more intensity to where the fires are starting. And if you notice, all of these ellipse masks are going into the white input of the glow node, and the white input is the glow mask, not the effect mask. As just a quick example of what the difference is, if I have this glow node and I take this ellipse and plug it into the blue mask, you can see exactly what's going on. This is the normal result of masking any effect inside of Fusion. But if I take the same thing and plug this into the glow mask on the glow node, we're going to have a much softer fall off. And that's because the glow is allowed to go outside of this mask. It's just not allowed to generate any glow based on information outside of this mask. So it's just a nice way to get a lot smoother and more realistic of a glow fall off. In the glow node, I have a low glow size and a pretty high glow amount. And then I also put this into a color corrector just to take out some saturation in the highlights and also give it just the tiniest bit of a tint. And then this color corrector is just taking some of the saturation out of the highlights and then not doing anything else to the other channels. After the isolated glow, we add in some more glow as well as tweak the colors of the image overall. So if we look at the luma keyer, this is selecting just the bright areas. We're putting this into a glow that just does an entire image of glow, and then a second one which does more of an anamorphic glow by having a high X glow size and a low Y size. And then this all goes into a color corrector, which does a lot of different stuff. So just on the master channel, it's adding in some orangish tint. It's bringing up the saturation. And if we go to the highlights, it's bringing down the saturation so that way we get that more white hot core. Now right now I have the apply mode set to be normal, which is totally fine, but I also like setting this to be screen so that way we get a more bright and more intense effect. Then after that, this is going to be going into the heat distortion. So we have a fast noise, which is masked out by those bright areas from the luma keyer before, so it's only showing this in those really bright sections. And inside of this fast noise, we have a seed rate of 1, as well as an expression on the center X and Y, so that way it's just raising up based on the time of the image. And that's going into the vary blur node, which is going to be adding in blur to select areas of the image, whatever's white in the fast noise. So that way it gives it a really nice heat distortion effect, in addition to a displace node with just a little bit of X refraction, Y refraction, and the spread cranked all the way up to 3. So that way it's just offsetting some of those pixels, blurring them, and it gives just a really nice intensity to the image. Finally, the last thing we have is adding in some smoke and fog. And how I have this set up is just a really simple like smoke wisp from Action Visual Effects. It's just sped up a ton. And then we have this going into our fast noise being merged over it just to add in some more texture to make it, feel a bit bigger. And then that's going into a transform to move it to the right position, as well as a color corrector to add in some orange tint. And then that is merged up with a luma keyer, so it is only being merged in the bright areas of the image. And on this last merge, you can see I have cache to disk as well. So if we go ahead and hit pre-render, that means we can get real-time playback at the end of our composition and then add in stuff like the text and any other final touches that we want to do. And once that's done, I just added in some text, and at the very end, we have a gamut node. So what this is doing is taking it from the linear color space that we've been working with and outputting it as Rec 709 scene. So basically this gamut node is doing what the viewer LUT is doing, but it's doing it to the actual image. So that way when we go back to the edit page, we see all of those same changes and we see it looking exactly how we saw it in Fusion. If you found this video hard to follow or just want a better understanding of Fusion's core, then you're in luck. I'm working on a Fusion course which is going to walk you through the basics of stuff like nodes, resolution, and color management. That's going to be coming out early next year, and right now you can join the waitlist to get a special discount when it launches. I'm really excited to launch it, and I think you're going to love it. But for right now, comment anything you learned down below, as well as any questions that you might have. Hopefully this video was fun, and I'll see you guys in the next one.